What if the pain that doctors dismiss as just anxiety is actually your body trying to tell you something more sinister? In a small Kansas town, 12-year-old Henry's mysterious stomach pains are labeled as gastritis, but the truth lurking beneath the surface is far more horrifying than any medical diagnosis. When night nurse Miriam feels inexplicably drawn to this troubled boy, she discovers disturbing drawings that lead her to an isolated house with a strange garden of carefully arranged stones. What secrets lie buried there? And why does Henry keep whispering his missing mother's name in his sleep? As Miriam digs deeper, she uncovers family secrets so dark and twisted, they'll leave you questioning what evil hides behind the closed doors of seemingly ordinary homes. Follow this heart-wrenching journey, where a child's unexplained pain becomes the key to uncovering a decades-old mystery that will change multiple lives forever. Follow our channel for more soul-stirring stories that expose the darkest corners of human nature. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from. We promise this is one story you won't be able to stop thinking about. On that gray Tuesday in Kansas City, the loudest sound at William Lake Elementary was typically the creaking of old desks shifting against the worn linoleum floor. The building itself, a squat brick structure from the 1970s, seemed to sigh with the weight of decades. Room 4B sat at the end of the east hallway, where the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting sickly shadows across Ms. Peterson's science class. Henry Matthews sat in the third row, his thin shoulders hunched forward, eyes fixed on the clock above the chalkboard. 10:41 a.m. One more minute until they could switch from cellular structure diagrams to the frog dissection he'd been dreading all week. The other kids whispered excitedly about cutting open the pale, rubbery bodies, but something about it made Henry's stomach tighten into knots. "All right, class, please put away your notebooks," Ms. Peterson announced, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "We'll be moving to the lab tables for today's practical lesson." The children began to shuffle papers and zip backpacks. Chairs scraped against the floor. Outside, clouds darkened, threatening rain. Henry reached for his battered notebook, the one with the torn cover his grandmother had taped back together. When it happened, a sudden, searing pain erupted in his abdomen. Not the dull ache he'd felt on and off for weeks, but something violent and intrusive, as if someone had reached inside him and was twisting his organs. The pain radiated outward like lightning strikes. "Henry, are you coming to the lab tables?" Ms. Peterson's voice seemed distant, underwater. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The room tilted. Sweat beaded on his forehead, cold and clammy. The fluorescent lights pulsed brighter, then dimmer. It's... Henry struggled to form words as the pressure built. The pain wasn't just physical, it carried something else. Flashes of images he couldn't place, smells he recognized but couldn't name. At precisely 10:42 a.m., when the second hand clicked into place on the institutional clock, Henry Matthews threw his head back and screamed, "It's pressing from inside." His voice, usually soft and hesitant, sliced through the classroom noise like a blade. His pale hands clutched at his stomach, fingernails digging into his worn Kansas City Royals t-shirt. His face, already naturally pallid, drained to the color of the marble floor, veins visible beneath translucent skin. Ms. Peterson froze mid-sentence, chalk hovering above the board. 23 pairs of eyes locked onto Henry as he slid from his chair, collapsing to his knees between the desks. "Oh my God, is he having a seizure?" someone whispered. A few nervous giggles bubbled up from the back row, laughter born of discomfort rather than cruelty. Then came the silence, that peculiar heavy quiet that descends when children sense real danger. "Someone get the nurse!" Ms. Peterson finally moved, rushing to Henry's side. "Tyler, go now." Tyler Barnes, the fastest runner in 5th grade, bolted from the room. The thunder of his footsteps echoed down the hallway, punctuated by Henry's ragged breathing. "It hurts," Henry whimpered, curling into himself on the floor. "Something's inside, pressing, trying to get out." "It's okay, Henry. Help is coming." Miss Peterson knelt beside him, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She'd taught for 17 years and never seen anything like this. "Can you tell me where it hurts exactly?" But Henry couldn't answer. His eyes had rolled back, showing only whites, and his lips moved soundlessly, forming words no one could understand. "Ms." Peterson noticed something strange, tears streaming down his face, but his expression wasn't one of physical pain. It was terror, pure and primal. The school nurse arrived with the principal in tow. Within minutes, an ambulance wailed in the distance, growing louder as it approached the school. Parents would be called. Forms would be filled out. The machine of procedure ground into motion. His grandmother is his only guardian, correct? Principal Nichols confirmed, scrolling through his tablet. Donna Whitlow? Yes, she raised him since his mother… well, you know. Miss Peterson lowered her voice, though the children were being herded to the library, away from the unfolding crisis. She disappeared when Henry was 5, just left one day. The paramedics worked efficiently, strapping the now semi-conscious boy to a stretcher. His eyelids fluttered, and he muttered something that sounded like dirt and dark and mama. One paramedic exchanged a knowing look with the other. Probably drug-related, their expressions seemed to say. It wouldn't be the first troubled kid from this neighborhood. At Kansas City Community Hospital, the emergency room was already overflowing with the usual Tuesday crowd. Workplace injuries, car accidents, elderly patients with complications. Henry was wheeled past them all, his small frame dwarfed by the adult-sized gurney. Dr. Marcus Reed, nearing the end of a 12-hour shift, reviewed Henry's vitals with practiced indifference. Blood pressure elevated, but not dangerously so. Temperature normal. Abdominal exam revealed tenderness, but no rigidity. No family history of appendicitis or other acute conditions, according to the grandmother who arrived an hour later, smelling faintly of cigarettes and wearing a waitress uniform from the waffle stop on Highway 71. Has he been under stress lately, Ms. Whitlow? Doctor, Reed asked, not looking up from his chart. No more than usual, Donna replied, her voice flat. He's always been sensitive, like his mother. Dr. Reed nodded, having already formed his diagnosis. It appears to be gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining, likely brought on by anxiety. We see it in children his age more often than you'd think. So he's not dying? Donna asked, no relief evident in her tone. No, ma'am. We'll give him something for the pain and inflammation. Keep him overnight for observation, but he should be fine to go home tomorrow. Just needs to avoid acidic foods, take it easy. But as Dr. Reed moved on to his next patient, he missed what the night nurse would later notice. Henry, sedated and supposedly sleeping, whispering a name over and over. Emily, his missing mother, whose absence had left a hole in his life that no one discussed. And while medications dripped into his veins, something else stirred in Henry's unconscious mind. Not gastritis, not anxiety. Something buried deep, pressing to surface. A truth his body remembered even if his mind did not. In his hospital room, the shadows lengthened as day turned to evening. Outside his window, a crow landed on the sill, watching with obsidian eyes before taking flight again, and Henry's hand, seemingly of its own volition, began to draw patterns in the air, tracing the shape of a garden, a shovel, and a woman's silhouette disappearing into the ground. The night shift at Kansas City Community Hospital always carried a different energy than the chaotic rush of daylight hours. As darkness settled over the city, the fluorescent corridors emptied of visitors and day staff, leaving behind only the skeleton crew of night workers moving through the halls like ghosts. Miriam Delgado had worked these quiet hours for 11 years now. At 42, her dark hair was threaded with silver strands that she never bothered to dye, and fine lines had begun to frame her amber eyes. The other nurses often wondered why someone with her experience hadn't pursued advancement, or at least switched to the better-paying day shift. None dared ask directly. Something about Miriam's quiet dignity discouraged personal questions. She moved through the pediatric ward with practiced efficiency, her rubber-soled shoes making almost no sound on the polished floors. Room 318 was her last stop before break. The boy who'd been admitted that afternoon with severe abdominal pain. Henry Matthews, age 12. The chart noted gastritis with a question mark beside it. Dr. Reed's handwriting hurried and dismissive. Miriam paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of the small figure in the oversized hospital bed. The boy was thin, too thin, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of chronic sleep deprivation rather than recent illness. His brown hair stuck up in tufts against the starched pillow, and even in sleep, his forehead remained creased with tension. "Just checking your vitals, sweetheart," she whispered, not expecting a response as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his skinny arm. Her movements were gentle, practiced. Over the years, she'd developed what the other nurses called ghost hands, the ability to take readings and adjust IVs without disturbing even the lightest sleepers. Tonight, though, something made her linger. Perhaps it was the way the moonlight from the half-open blinds cast shadows across his face, or how his fingers twitched against the sheets, as if reaching for something. As she leaned closer to check his IV site, Miriam noticed dried tear tracks on his pale cheeks and, more concerning, faint scratches around his wrists, as if he'd been restrained or had scratched himself in distress. Not the typical presentation for gastritis, regardless of what Dr. Reed had scribbled on the chart. A whispered name escaped the boy's lips. Emily. The name struck Miriam like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Emily, the name she'd chosen for the daughter she never got to meet. The daughter who died inside her when the tractor flipped on her husband Robert, killing him instantly and sending Miriam into premature labor with a baby too small to survive. 7 years ago, but the wound remained raw beneath her carefully constructed calm. She studied Henry's face with new intensity, noting the subtle curve of his nose, the set of his jaw. Something about him was hauntingly familiar in ways she couldn't articulate. Not just his age, close to what her child would have been, but something in his features that tugged at the edges of her memory. With slightly trembling hands, Miriam reached for his chart, flipping through the admission paperwork. Guardian, Donna Whitlow, maternal grandmother. Mother, Emily Whitlow. Status unknown. Last known contact 7 years ago. Father, not listed. Emily Whitlow. Another Emily, gone. The coincidence felt heavier than it should. Miriam's break time came and went as she sat beside Henry's bed, watching his troubled sleep, his occasional murmurings, and the way his hands sometimes clawed at his stomach even while unconscious. At 2:17 a.m., his eyes flew open, deep brown eyes, disoriented and filled with terror. "She's under the stones," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "She can't breathe down there." "Who can't breathe, Henry?" Miriam asked gently, professional instinct taking over despite the chill that ran down her spine. But Henry's eyes had already closed again, his body surrendering back to the sedatives coursing through his system. Miriam made a note in his chart about the episode, careful to record his exact words. Something told her they mattered more than Dr. Reed's hasty diagnosis. When her shift ended at 6 a.m., Miriam found herself driving not toward her small apartment in the Westport district, but following the address listed in Henry's file. The Whitlow house sat on the outskirts of the county, a gray single-story ranch-style home with peeling paint and overgrown grass. The property backed onto woods, isolated from neighbors by at least a quarter mile on each side. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the mist that clung to the ground as Miriam parked her faded blue Honda across the street. What was she doing here? This wasn't protocol. This wasn't even rational. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Henry's pain was more than physical. It was a message, a warning. She approached the house with the pretext of delivering hospital paperwork, a manila envelope of discharge instructions clutched in her hand like a shield. No car in the driveway. Donna was likely still at the hospital with Henry. Miriam climbed the 3 concrete steps to the porch, noting the absence of any personal touches. No plants, no welcome mat, no wind chimes like those that adorned so many Kansas porches. Knocking brought no response, as expected. She tried the door handle, surprised to find it unlocked. The rational part of her mind sounded alarms, trespassing, unprofessional conduct, possible termination, but something stronger pushed her forward. She stepped inside, immediately struck by the stale air and sparse furnishings. The living room contained only a sagging couch, a small TV on a stand, and an ancient armchair. No photos adorned the walls except for a dusty school portrait of Henry from several years earlier. But behind the TV stand, partially hidden, stood an antique oak cabinet with several framed photographs atop it, all coated with a film of dust. Miriam approached, drawn by the incongruity. Here finally were family photos, yellowed with age and neglect. A younger Donna with a teenage girl who must be Emily, Henry's mother. The girl had Henry's eyes, deep and somehow haunted, even in a posed portrait. And behind these frames, almost hidden, lay a tattered notebook with a once-red cover now faded to rust, stained with what looked like old ink spills. Without thinking, Miriam opened it to the first page. Childish handwriting filled the lines, but the words stopped her heart. "My dreams are memories, I didn't make this up." Miriam's hands trembled as she slipped the notebook into her purse, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The rational part of her brain, the part that had carried her through medical school, through losing Robert, through the stillbirth, screamed at her to put it back. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was theft. But something stronger than reason propelled her actions, a maternal instinct she thought had died with her unborn daughter. She closed the front door quietly behind her and practically ran to her car, the morning mist swirling around her ankles like ghostly fingers trying to pull her back. Only when she was 3 blocks away, stopped at a red light on Maple Street, did she allow herself to breathe normally again. "What have I done?" she whispered to her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked wild-eyed, her usually neat ponytail coming undone, dark circles beneath her eyes from the night shift. The notebook sat on the passenger seat like a live thing, its presence impossible to ignore. Miriam drove the rest of the way home on autopilot, her mind spinning scenarios, each more irrational than the last. Was she really suspecting something sinister, based on a boy's gastritis attack and some sleep talking? People disappeared all the time, especially troubled young mothers. That didn't mean crimes had been committed. Her apartment welcomed her with the silence she usually found comforting after the noise of the hospital. Today, though, the silence felt oppressive. She made coffee she didn't drink and toast she couldn't eat, the notebook sitting untouched on her kitchen table for nearly an hour before she finally gathered the courage to open it again. The pages were filled with drawings that would disturb any parent or teacher, crude but startlingly detailed for a child's hand. The first few depicted what appeared to be a faceless woman, her head an empty oval, standing in various poses. Sometimes beside a small boy who must be Henry himself, sometimes alone beside a tree, sometimes just her empty face filling the entire page. "Oh, Henry," Miriam breathed, turning the pages slowly. The drawings grew more disturbing as she continued. A male figure wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat appeared repeatedly, always holding something long and thin. A shovel, Miriam realized with a chill. One particularly unsettling image showed the man standing over a dark rectangle in what appeared to be a garden, the faceless woman nearby with her arms outstretched. Between the drawings were fragments of text in a child's uneven handwriting. "Not a dream." She screamed under the dirt. "The smell of wet earth and gasoline. I hear her when I sleep." The man with the hat took her away. Miriam closed the notebook, feeling physically ill. These weren't the random scribbles of an anxious child with stomach problems. They were too specific, too consistent. The same scenes appeared again and again with slight variations, as if Henry was trying to piece together fragments of memory or nightmare. She should take this to the police or at least to hospital administration. She should report her suspicions, hand over the notebook, let professionals handle whatever this was. But who would believe her? What exactly would she say? That a 12-year-old boy with diagnosed gastritis had disturbing dreams and kept a creepy notebook? They'd laugh her out of the station, or worse, report her to the nursing board for stealing a patient's property and invading his home. Her shift started in 10 hours. She needed sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Instead, she spread the pages of the notebook across her kitchen table, searching for patterns, connections, anything that might make sense of the grotesque imagery. One drawing near the back caught her attention, a house she recognized as the Whitlow residence, but with a strange addition, a garden behind it, depicted as a series of overlapping circles that Henry had colored black and gray. Above the garden, Henry had drawn countless tiny stars, but one large one blazed in red crayon. Written below in the same red, "Where she is now." Sleep finally claimed her around noon, her head resting on her arms at the table, the notebook pages surrounding her like fallen leaves. Her dreams were troubled, images of dirt and stone, a woman calling her name, a boy crying for help from the bottom of a well. The hospital was quiet when she arrived for her shift that evening, unusually so for a weeknight. She made her way to room 318 with her pulse racing, not knowing what she would say to Henry when she saw him. But the room was empty, the bed freshly made for the next patient. "Looking for the Matthews boy?" Nurse Gloria asked from the doorway, startling Miriam. "His grandmother checked him out around 4, against medical advice if you ask me. Dr. Reed wanted to run more tests." "Did he say anything before he left?" Miriam asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Gloria shrugged. "Not to me. That grandmother of his, though, piece of work. Argued with billing for nearly an hour, then practically dragged the poor kid out by his arm. Some people shouldn't be raising children." Miriam nodded absently, her mind already racing ahead. Where would they have gone? Home, most likely. The thought of Henry returning to that house, to the care of the woman who'd left all those family photos to gather dust, made something twist painfully in her chest. Her shift crawled by in a fog of worry and second-guessing. She checked her phone obsessively, though she wasn't sure what she was expecting. It wasn't as if Henry had her number. Just after midnight, she was changing an IV bag for a post-op patient when her colleague Diane called her to the nurse's station. "Phone for you, Miriam, says it's urgent." Miriam took the receiver with a frown. "This is Nurse Delgado. Is this the nurse who took care of Henry Matthews last night?" The voice was small, tight with strain. "Yes, this is she. Who am I speaking with?" "It's Henry." The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "I found your name on my discharge papers. You need to come back, she knows. Henry, are you all right? Where's your grandmother?" "She's sleeping. I don't have much time. Did you take my notebook?" Miriam hesitated, guilt washing over her. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "You found it," Henry interrupted, his voice showing emotion for the first time. "I knew you would. That's why the pain started when you were on shift. It wanted you to find it." "What wanted me to find it, Henry?" "The truth," his voice cracked. "About my mom. About what happened in the garden." Before Miriam could respond, she heard a sharp intake of breath from Henry's end, followed by the sound of a door opening. "I have to go," he whispered urgently. "Come tomorrow, please." The line went dead. Miriam stared at the phone in her hand, her mind reeling. The rational explanation was that Henry was troubled, perhaps even mentally ill, trauma from his mother's abandonment manifesting as delusions and physical symptoms. That would be the medical assessment. But Miriam had stopped believing in neat medical assessments the day the doctors had told her there was nothing physically wrong with her that would explain why she couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. Sometimes, the body knew truths the conscious mind refused to acknowledge. When she returned to Henry's room an hour later, just to check, she told herself, something caught her eye on the bedside table. A small piece of paper tucked partially under the lamp. She unfolded it with trembling fingers to find a single line in that now familiar childish handwriting. "You found the notebook, right?" The rain began shortly after sunset, fat droplets striking Miriam's windshield with increasing urgency as she drove toward the Whitlow house. The weather service had warned of severe thunderstorms moving through eastern Kansas, but Miriam barely registered the radio announcer's voice over the pounding of her own heart. She'd called in sick for the first time in 3 years, earning a concerned look from her supervisor. In 11 hours, if she didn't show up with a doctor's note, there would be consequences. Right now, that seemed like the least of her worries. The manila envelope on her passenger seat contained a bottle of antacid medication, her flimsy excuse for this unsanctioned house call. Next to it lay Henry's notebook, its pages now dog-eared from her obsessive reading. She'd memorized every drawing, every cryptic sentence. Sleep had eluded her entirely, replaced by a gnawing certainty that something was terribly wrong at the Whitlow house. Lightning split the sky as she turned onto the gravel road leading to the isolated property, illuminating the raindrops until they looked like falling silver needles. The windshield wipers struggled against the deluge, creating brief moments of clarity before the glass blurred again. Miriam's headlights caught the reflective eyes of a fox crossing the road, its russet body a streak against the darkness before it disappeared into the underbrush. The house appeared exactly as it had the day before, grey, featureless, a structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No porch light welcomed visitors, only a single dim glow from what Miriam assumed was the kitchen window. She parked 100 yards down the road, not wanting her headlights to announce her arrival, and sat for a moment with the engine idling. The rational part of her mind made one last attempt to assert control. "This is insane," she whispered to herself, watching rain stream down the windshield. "You're risking your job, possibly your nursing license, based on a disturbed child's drawings." But the maternal instinct that had awakened within her, dormant since she'd buried her stillborn daughter, would not be silenced. She killed the engine, grabbed her raincoat from the back seat, and stepped into the downpour. The rain soaked through her shoes immediately, her feet sinking into the mud as she made her way not to the front door, but around the side of the house. The beam of her small flashlight bounced erratically as she moved, her free hand held above her eyes in a futile attempt to shield them from the rain. Lightning flashed again, closer now, followed almost immediately by a boom of thunder that Miriam felt in her chest. The backyard was larger than she'd expected, stretching at least 50 yards before meeting the tree line. Her flashlight beam caught the edge of what appeared to be a vegetable garden gone to seed, a few tomato cages, tilting at odd angles amid the overgrowth. But beyond that, at the very back of the property, was something else, an area that didn't match the wild abandon of the rest of the yard. Miriam moved closer, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs. The space was roughly circular, maybe 15 feet in diameter. Unlike the rest of the mud-soaked yard, this area was covered entirely in stones, flat river rocks arranged in an intricate pattern, almost like a crude mosaic. Some were the size of dinner plates, others no bigger than Miriam's palm, all arranged with deliberate care. The smell hit her then, faint but unmistakable beneath the clean scent of rain, gasoline, just as Henry had written in his notebook. Miriam knelt at the edge of the stone circle, her knees sinking into the mud. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter, no longer drowning out the sound of her ragged breathing. She ran her fingers over the nearest stones, surprised to find them warm despite the cool night air. One rock near the center seemed different from the others, slightly raised as if recently disturbed. With trembling hands, she worked her fingers around its edge and lifted. The earth beneath was darker, looser. Something metallic gleamed in her flashlight beam, the rusted remains of what might once have been a toy car. Beside it, half buried in the mud, was a faded red ribbon, the kind young girls used to tie back their hair. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. This matched Henry's drawings exactly. The garden of stones, the buried toys. She began to dig frantically with her bare hands, mud caking beneath her fingernails, rain mingling with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "What are you doing?" The voice, cold and brittle as ice, froze Miriam in place. Slowly, she turned her flashlight toward the source, revealing Donna Whitlow standing on the back porch. The older woman's face was half in shadow, but Miriam could see her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "Miss Whitlow," Miriam began, struggling to keep her voice steady, "I brought some medication for Henry, for his stomach. At midnight? In my backyard?" Donna took a step forward, her bathrobe flapping in the wind like dark wings. "I don't think so, Nurse Delgado." The use of her name sent a chill through Miriam that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through her clothes. She hadn't introduced herself to Donna at the hospital. The older woman would have had to check Henry's discharge papers to know who had cared for him. "How is Henry feeling?" Miriam asked, slowly rising to her feet, the muddy ribbon clutched in her palm. "He's resting," Donna replied, her voice eerily calm. "Children get these notions, you know. Imaginary friends, monster under the bed. Henry's always been creative with his fears." Lightning illuminated the yard again, casting Donna's face in harsh white light. For a split second, Miriam saw something in the older woman's eyes, not anger or even suspicion, but a terrible emptiness. "You shouldn't have come back here, Miriam." The way she said it, soft, almost regretful, raised the hair on the back of Miriam's neck. She took an instinctive step backward, nearly tripping over the displaced stone. "I'm concerned about Henry," Miriam said, fighting to keep her voice professional. "His symptoms seemed unusual for gastritis, and he was saying some concerning things while sedated." "Were you concerned when you broke into my house yesterday?" Donna asked, her head tilting slightly to one side. "When you stole my grandson's private property?" Miriam's mouth went dry. How could Donna know about the notebook unless Henry had told her? And why would Henry reveal that, knowing it would put Miriam at risk? "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, taking another step back. "I think you do." Donna's voice hardened. "I think you should leave now, Nurse Delgado, before you find yourself in a situation you can't explain to your supervisors or to the police." The threat hung in the air between them, clear as the lightning that continued to flash overhead. Miriam clutched the ribbon tighter in her fist and nodded slowly. "I'll go," she said, "but I'll be checking on Henry tomorrow, at the hospital." Donna's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Henry won't be returning to the hospital. His condition has improved dramatically, but I'll be sure to tell him you were asking after him." Miriam walked backward toward the side of the house, unwilling to turn her back on the older woman. Only when she reached her car did she release the breath she'd been holding, her hands shaking so badly she could barely insert the key into the ignition. As she pulled away from the property, her headlights briefly illuminated an upstairs window. A small pale face watched her leave. Henry, his palm pressed flat against the glass, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear. Back at the hospital, Miriam walked straight to the pediatric wing, her muddy clothes drawing curious stares from colleagues. In the supply closet, She found a clean pad of drawing paper and some colored pencils meant for younger patients. She worked through the rest of her shift in a daze, responding to call buttons and checking vitals on autopilot, while her mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. At dawn, she went to check on a post-op patient in room 322 and found a surprise waiting on the adjacent empty bed. A crude drawing lay on the pristine sheets, clearly Henry's work, though she had no idea how he'd managed to deliver it. The image showed a hand reaching up through a circle of stones, while a woman with Miriam's dark ponytail stood nearby. Written at the bottom in red pencil, "She's trying to tell us something." The Kansas City Public Records Office occupied the basement of an aging municipal building downtown. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over rows of metal filing cabinets and ancient computer terminals. The air smelled of dust and paper deteriorating slowly over decades. Miriam had been sitting at the same microfiche reader for 3 hours, her eyes burning from strain, a half-empty cup of vending machine coffee gone cold beside her. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. After her confrontation with Donna Whitlow and the mysterious appearance of Henry's drawing at the hospital, Miriam had called in sick for a second consecutive day, something she'd never done in her entire nursing career. Her supervisor's concern had shifted to suspicion, but Miriam couldn't bring herself to care. Something far more important than her attendance record was at stake. "Emily Whitlow," she whispered to herself, scrolling through another reel of archived school records. The name had become a mantra, repeated countless times as Miriam searched for any trace of Henry's missing mother. The red ribbon she'd found buried in the stone garden lay on the table beside her, now cleaned of mud and carefully smoothed. It looked ordinary enough, the kind sold in packs of 6 at any drugstore, yet Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that it was significant, a message from someone who could no longer speak for herself. "Excuse me?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. The elderly clerk who'd been eyeing her suspiciously for hours now stood at her elbow. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Did you find what you were looking for?" Miriam shook her head, fatigue making her movements sluggish. "Not yet. Is there any way I could stay a little longer? This is important." The clerk's expression softened slightly at the desperation in Miriam's voice. "What exactly are you researching? Maybe I can point you in the right direction. I've worked here for 27 years. Know this place better than my own house." Miriam hesitated. How much could she say without sounding like a lunatic? "I'm looking for information on a former student at Lakewood Elementary, Emily Whitlow. She would have attended in the late 1990s. The clerk frowned, thinking, "Whitlow? That name does ring a bell. Not from school records, though." She tapped a finger against her chin. "Have you checked the police archives? They're in Section D, back corner." Miriam's heart skipped a beat. Police archives? Why would Emily be in those? The clerk shrugged. "Can't say for sure it's the same Whitlow, but there was a case. Domestic disturbance calls, I think. Rural address, out by the county line. This would have been, 7 or 8 years ago. 7 years ago, right around when Emily disappeared, leaving Henry with his grandmother." Miriam thanked the clerk and hurried to Section D, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten. The police archives were even more disorganized than the school records, with handwritten labels on many of the boxes that had clearly never been digitized. The 15-minute warning came and went, but the clerk, seeing Miriam's intensity, pretended not to notice. Finally, in a box labeled Domestic Disturbance 2018, Miriam found a thin file with the name Whitlow E typed on the tab. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were half a dozen incident reports, all with the same address, the house where Henry now lived with Donna. The responding officers had documented calls from neighbors reporting screaming, a young woman fleeing the house only to be dragged back inside, vague suspicions of child endangerment that were never substantiated. The final report, dated just 3 weeks before Emily's disappearance, included a photograph of a young woman with a bruised cheek and split lip. Emily Whitlow, age 22. Henry would have been 5 then. The resemblance between mother and son was striking. The same deep-set eyes, the same vulnerability in their expression. Clipped to the back of the file was a note. Subject requested restraining order against mother, Donna Whitlow, but did not appear at hearing. Case dismissed. Miriam's blood ran cold. Emily had tried to get away from Donna, had tried to protect herself and, presumably, Henry, and then she had vanished. "Ma'am, I really need to lock up now." the clerk called, her keys jingling impatiently. "Just one more minute, please," Miriam begged, quickly photographing the documents with her phone. As she was about to close the file, she noticed an unmarked manila envelope tucked into the back. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, all addressed to the Kansas City Police Department, all stamped, "Return to sender, insufficient address." The handwriting on the envelopes matched the signature on Emily's police reports. Miriam slipped them into her purse without thinking, her heart pounding. She had no right to take them, but a desperate certainty drove her actions. If she didn't uncover the truth, no one would. Outside, twilight had fallen over Kansas City, the streetlights flickering to life one by one. Miriam sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the 3 sealed envelopes on the passenger seat. The ethical boundaries she'd spent her career respecting seemed less important now than the growing conviction that Emily Whitlow had not simply abandoned her son. Finally, with hands that still shook slightly, she opened the first letter. "To whom it may concern," it began in neat, careful handwriting. "I am writing because I fear for my life and the life of my son, Henry. My mother, Donna Whitlow, has become increasingly unstable. She has threatened me repeatedly since I expressed my intention to move out with Henry." The letter detailed instances of verbal and physical abuse, Donna's obsessive control over both Emily and Henry, her refusal to allow either of them to form relationships outside the home. It ended with a plea, "Please help us before something terrible happens." The second letter was similar but more urgent, written after Emily had apparently found an apartment and was planning to leave with Henry the following week. "She says she'll never let him go," Emily wrote, "that he belongs to her, not me. I'm afraid to sleep." Miriam's hands trembled as she opened the final envelope. The letter inside was shorter, written in a hurried scrawl that suggested extreme distress. "This is my final attempt to reach you. We are leaving tonight. If you receive this after we've gone, and something has happened to me, please know that my mother is responsible. She has threatened to put me in the ground rather than let me take Henry. I've told Henry that if anything happens to me, he'll see it in his dreams. Children are more connected to the truth than adults give them credit for. If something happens to me, Henry will know. He will see in dreams." Miriam sat frozen in the driver's seat, the letters scattered around her like fallen leaves. Henry's stomach pains, his cries that something was pressing from inside, the drawings of a woman beneath the earth. They weren't delusions or anxiety. They were memories trying to surface, a connection to his mother that transcended her absence. She started the car with a new sense of purpose. Henry needed to see these letters, to know that his mother hadn't abandoned him, that she had fought to protect him until the very end. The hospital was quiet when Miriam arrived, the night shift just beginning their rounds. She slipped into an unused consultation room and dialed the Whitlow house, her pulse racing. 1 ring, 2, 3. "Hello?" Henry's voice, small and cautious. "Henry, it's Miriam, the nurse from the hospital. I found something you need to see. Letters from your mother." A sharp intake of breath. "I knew you'd find them. The dreams told me they existed. Henry, listen to me. Your grandmother, is she home?" "No," he whispered. "She went to the pharmacy. My stomach hurts again. Worse than before." Miriam closed her eyes, a decision crystallizing in her mind. "I'm coming to get you. Be ready in 15 minutes. Pack only what you absolutely need. The pain won't stop until we find her," Henry said, his voice suddenly older than his years. "Until we uncover what's in the garden." "I know," Miriam replied, already moving toward the exit. "We're going to find her together." As she drove toward the Whitlow house for what she hoped would be the final time, the red ribbon from the garden lay on the dashboard like a drop of blood. Beside it, the 3 letters from Emily, evidence of a mother's desperate attempt to save her son from a fate she couldn't escape herself. The small motel room on the outskirts of Kansas City bore the unmistakable scent of decades of cigarette smoke, poorly masked by industrial cleaner. The faded floral bedspread had seen better days, as had the laminate dresser with one drawer perpetually ajar. But it was anonymous, paid for in cash, and most importantly, far from the Whitlow house where Henry had spent the last 7 years of his life in silent terror. The boy sat cross-legged on the bed now, his thin frame swimming in a Kansas City Royals sweatshirt that had once been blue but had faded to a nondescript gray. His hands moved restlessly over the letters Miriam had found, touching his mother's handwriting, as if he could absorb some essence of her through the paper. "She tried to save me," he whispered, his voice cracking. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, pattering against the window in an irregular rhythm. She tried, and nobody listened. Miriam sat in the room's only chair, an uncomfortable vinyl affair that squeaked with every movement. The decision to take Henry had been impulsive, perhaps reckless, but the fear in his eyes when she'd arrived at the house had solidified her resolve. He'd been waiting on the porch with a small backpack containing only a change of clothes, his school notebook, and a faded photograph of a young woman holding a toddler, Emily and Henry, in happier times. "These letters," Miriam said gently, "they prove your mother didn't abandon you, Henry. She was trying to protect you." Henry nodded, his eyes too old for his 12 years. "I always knew she didn't just leave. Grandma said Mom ran off with some man, that she didn't care about me anymore, but I remembered different things. The things you drew in your notebook?" "Yeah." He looked up, meeting Miriam's gaze directly for the first time. "The dreams started last year. At first they were just feelings. Being scared, can't breathe, darkness. Then I started seeing things, the garden, the stones, Mom's face looking up at me from under the ground." A chill ran down Miriam's spine, despite the room's stuffy warmth. "That's when the stomach pains began?" Henry nodded. "It felt like something was trying to get out, like the truth was stuck inside me, pushing to get free." His fingers traced the edge of one letter. "What do we do now?" It was the question Miriam had been avoiding since their hasty departure from the Whitlow house. She had essentially kidnapped a minor, stolen confidential police files, and was now hiding out in a motel that didn't require ID. Her nursing career was almost certainly over. Possible criminal charges loomed. And yet, looking at Henry's face, so like his mother's in the police photograph, she couldn't bring herself to regret a single decision. "We need to go to the police," she said finally. "Show them the letters, tell them about the garden." Henry's face paled. "They won't believe us. Grandma is friends with all the cops in town. Sheriff Daniels comes over for dinner every month. They all think I'm a problem child with an overactive imagination." Miriam frowned, remembering the dismissed restraining order request. Small-town politics and personal connections could easily bury inconvenient truths. "Then we need evidence," she said, determination hardening her voice. "Something concrete they can't ignore." Her phone rang suddenly, the shrill sound making them both jump. The screen displayed her supervisor's number. Her third missed shift in a row had not gone unnoticed. Miriam silenced the call, but the interruption had broken something in the room's atmosphere. Reality was intruding on their temporary sanctuary. "She'll be looking for me by now," Henry said quietly. "Grandma. She always finds me when I try to hide." The resignation in his voice sparked something fierce in Miriam's chest, a protective fury she hadn't felt since the day the doctors had told her she would never carry a child to term. Without thinking, she pulled the small digital recorder from her purse, a device she sometimes used to record patient care notes between shifts. "We're going back," she said, her decision sudden but absolute. "Tonight. But this time, we're going prepared." The drive back to the Whitlow house seemed both endless and too brief. They had formulated a simple plan. Miriam would return Henry, claiming she'd found him wandering near the hospital, apparently sleepwalking. She would insist on coming inside to check his vital signs. Concerned about his recurring symptoms, the recorder would be running in her pocket the entire time. "Get her talking about your mom," Miriam instructed, as they neared the turnoff to the gravel road. "Ask direct questions. Why did she leave? Where did she go? Push her, but be careful." Henry nodded, his face a mask of determination, despite the fear that made his hands tremble in his lap. "I can do it. For Mom." The Whitlow house was ablaze with lights when they pulled up. Donna's ancient Buick parked haphazardly in the driveway, as if she'd returned in a hurry. Miriam squeezed Henry's hand once before they approached the front door. The recorder was running in her coat pocket, its small red light covered by a piece of medical tape. Donna answered on the first knock, her face transforming from fury to calculated relief at the sight of Henry. "Where have you been?" she demanded, pulling him roughly over the threshold. Her eyes narrowed as they fell on Miriam. "What is she doing here?" "I found Henry near the hospital," Miriam explained, her nurse's professional demeanor sliding into place like armor. He seemed disoriented. "Given his recent symptoms, I wanted to make sure he got home safely and check his vital signs." Donna's lips pressed into a thin line, but she stepped aside, allowing Miriam to enter. The house smelled of cigarette smoke and something else, chemical, sharp. Bleach, Miriam realized with a jolt. The living room appeared recently cleaned, surfaces gleaming unnaturally in the harsh overhead light. "He's fine," Donna said curtly. "Just an attention seeker, like his mother." Henry, who had been standing with uncharacteristic stillness, suddenly spoke. "Why did Mom leave us, Grandma? You never really told me." The question hung in the air, seemingly innocuous, yet loaded with hidden meaning. Donna's eyes darted between Henry and Miriam, suspicion evident in her tight expression. "I've told you 100 times. She ran off with that man from the gas station. Didn't even leave a note." Donna's voice was practiced, smooth with repetition. "Some women aren't cut out to be mothers." "Then why did she try to get a restraining order against you?" Henry asked, his small voice steady despite the bomb he'd just dropped. Donna froze, her face draining of color before flushing crimson. "Who told you that nonsense?" "Her letters did," Henry replied, taking a step back toward Miriam. "The ones she wrote to the police before she disappeared." "You little liar!" Donna's composure cracked, her voice rising to a screech. "Your mother was the liar, always making up stories, turning you against me." Miriam moved slightly, positioning herself between Henry and his grandmother. "Ms. Whitlow, please calm down. Henry's been through a lot." "You," Donna's eyes fixed on Miriam with pure hatred. "You've been putting these ideas in his head, breaking into my house, stealing things, poisoning my grandson's mind with your delusions." "They're not delusions," Henry said, his voice stronger now. "I know what happened in the garden, Grandma. I see it in my dreams every night." Something shifted in Donna's face then, a subtle collapsing, as if the scaffolding holding her together had suddenly given way. She sank onto the sofa, her anger giving way to something darker, more resigned. "You don't know anything," she whispered. "You're just a child." "I know Mom wanted to leave," Henry pressed, moving closer despite Miriam's protective arm. "She wanted to take me away from here, away from you. She wanted to take you from me." The admission seemed torn from Donna's throat, ragged and raw. "My only grandchild, the only family I had left after your grandfather died. She was going to disappear with you, erase me from your life completely." Miriam felt the recorder pressing against her hip, capturing every damning word. Henry stood straighter, emboldened by each crack in his grandmother's facade. "What did you do to her?" he demanded, tears streaming unchecked down his face. "Tell me the truth." "She wanted to go," Donna screamed, suddenly on her feet again, hands clenched into claws at her sides. "Wanted to leave. I didn't let her." The confession hung in the air, terrible and final. Henry staggered back as if physically struck, colliding with Miriam, who steadied him with trembling hands. "Henry, wait in the car," Miriam said quietly, pressing her keys into his palm. "Now." For once he didn't argue, backing toward the door with his eyes still fixed on his grandmother's contorted face. Only when the front door closed behind him did Miriam retrieve the recorder from her pocket, holding it up so Donna could see the blinking red light. "It's over, Donna," she said softly. "The police will excavate the garden. They'll find Emily, and you'll never hurt Henry again." Donna stared at the recorder, her expression shifting from rage to something almost like relief. "You have no idea what you've done," she said finally. "No idea what's really buried in that garden." As Miriam backed toward the door, her eyes never leaving Donna's face, she felt something hard press against her heel. Looking down, she saw a small metal box, partially visible beneath the freshly scrubbed carpet's edge, hastily hidden perhaps, when Donna realized Henry was missing. In a split-second decision, Miriam snatched it up and fled, Donna's anguished scream following her into the night. The Kansas City Police Department's interview room was deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. The hard plastic chair dug into Miriam's back as she sat beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting, her hands clasped tightly around a paper cup of watery coffee. The metal table between her and Detective Lisa Morales bore decades of scratches from nervous fingernails. The clock on the wall seemed frozen at 2:17 a.m., though Miriam knew they'd been there for hours. "Let me get this straight," Detective Morales said, rubbing her temples. She was a compact woman with short salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much in 20 years on the force. "You stole confidential police files, essentially kidnapped a minor, recorded a conversation without consent, and now you're accusing Donna Whitlow of murdering her own daughter based on a child's nightmares and some old letters." When laid out like that, Miriam's actions over the past few days sounded not just illegal, but delusional. She swallowed hard, fighting against the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. "I know how it sounds," she admitted. "But Henry is 12, Morales interrupted, "and by your own admission has been experiencing severe abdominal pain and possibly hallucinations. He's currently being evaluated by child psychologists." The thought of Henry alone in some sterile examination room made Miriam's chest tighten painfully. They'd been separated immediately upon arrival at the police station, Henry whisked away by social services, while Miriam was led to this claustrophobic box. The metal box she'd taken from the Whitlow house sat on the table between them, still unopened. "Just listen to the recording," Miriam pleaded. "Donna admits she stopped Emily from leaving, and there's something buried in that garden, something Henry has been dreaming about for months." Morales sighed, a sound heavy with resignation rather than dismissal. "We've dispatched officers to the property with a warrant. If there's anything to find, they'll find it." She tapped the metal box. "In the meantime, let's see what was so important that you risked a breaking and entering charge to take it." The box was old, its once silver surface tarnished to a dull grey. A simple latch held it closed, no lock requiring a key. Morales donned latex gloves before carefully lifting the lid, her professional detachment momentarily shaken by what lay inside. A child's necklace rested atop a folded piece of paper. The pendant was shaped like half a heart, the kind meant to be worn with a matching piece to form a whole. Engraved on the visible side was a single word: always. "Henry has the other half," Miriam whispered, recognition dawning. "He wears it under his shirt. I noticed it at the hospital." Morales carefully unfolded the paper, revealing a handwritten letter. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. Her eyes widened slightly as she read, professional stoicism briefly cracking. "This is dated 2 days before Emily Whitlow was reported missing," she said quietly. Miriam leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What does it say?" Morales hesitated, then began to read aloud. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, then what I feared has happened. My mother has made good on her threats. I'm writing this in the middle of the night, Henry sleeping beside me, unaware that tomorrow will change everything. We're leaving at dawn before she wakes. I've saved enough from my cashier job to get us to St. Louis, where my old college roommate has offered us her spare room until I can get on my feet. Mum found out about our plan today. I saw it in her eyes, that same emptiness that was there when Dad died. She told me she'd rather see me dead than let me take Henry away from her. I believe her. I'm leaving this box where Henry knows to look if anything happens to me. My son is special, more intuitive than other children. We have a connection that goes beyond normal mother and child bonds. If something happens to me, Henry will know. He'll feel it even if he doesn't understand what he's feeling. If you find this, it means I failed to get him away safely. It means I'm probably dead, and Henry is still trapped with her. Please, I beg you, take him far away from this house, from her poisonous influence, and tell him what I never got the chance to say in person, that my love always was and always will be, pressing from inside me. Too big to contain, too powerful to die, even when my body does. Emily Whitlow." Silence filled the room as Morales finished reading. Miriam wiped tears from her cheeks, Emily's final words confirming what they had pieced together from fragments and dreams. "The other half of the necklace," Miriam said through her tears, "that's what Henry was wearing in the hospital. Always, and what? What's on his half?" Morales checked the letter again. "It doesn't say, but there's something else." She turned the paper over, revealing a smaller note on the back. "P.S. If my mother has harmed me, look for evidence in the garden behind the house. She thinks no one knows about her special place there, but I've seen her late at night moving stones, burying things. Whatever you find there will tell the truth she's tried to hide." The detective's phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. She answered with a terse "Morales," her expression shifting from professional detachment to shock as she listened to the voice on the other end. "I understand. Secure the scene. I'm on my way." She hung up, fixing Miriam with an unreadable stare. They found something in the garden. Human remains. Miriam closed her eyes, a strange mixture of vindication and grief washing over her. "Emily," she whispered. "That's just it," Morales said, already gathering her things. "Based on preliminary examination, the remains have been there for at least 15 years. Emily disappeared 7 years ago." The revelation hit Miriam like a physical blow. "Then who?" "I don't know." But I'm taking you with me. The social worker just called as well. Henry's having another episode. He's asking for you. The drive to Kansas Children's Hospital passed in a blur of flashing emergency lights and terse radio communications. By the time they reached the pediatric psychiatric ward, Henry's condition had escalated from abdominal pain to something the doctors couldn't explain. His body temperature dropping dangerously low, his conscious mind seemingly disconnected from reality. He keeps saying the same thing over and over, the attending physician explained, leading them toward the observation room. Something about 2 of them, and deeper than we thought. We've run every test we can think of, but medically there's no explanation for his symptoms. Through the window, Miriam could see Henry lying on a hospital bed, his small body racked with shivers despite the heated blankets covering him. His lips moved continuously, forming words no one could hear. "Let me talk to him," Miriam pleaded. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, Morales nodded to the doctor. 5 minutes. Henry's eyes fluttered open as Miriam approached his bedside, recognition slowly dawning in his fever-bright gaze. "You found the box," he whispered, voice raw from screaming. "Mom's letter." "Yes," Miriam confirmed, taking his cold hand between her warm ones. "The police are at the garden now, Henry. They're going to find her." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not just her. 2 of them. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "2 bodies?" Miriam asked, confusion clouding her face. Henry shook his head weakly. "The dreams changed after I met you. I started seeing another woman, younger than Mom. She had a baby." His fingers tightened around Miriam's. "The baby didn't make it out of the ground. They're buried together." A strange buzzing filled Miriam's ears, the room tilting around her. "When?" she managed to ask. "When were they buried?" 15 years ago, Henry whispered. "The woman's name was Rebecca Delgado." The name struck Miriam like lightning, her knees buckling as memories long suppressed came rushing back. Rebecca, her younger sister who had disappeared during her first year of college, leaving only a brief note about finding herself in Europe. The sister whose body was never found, whose case went cold after months of fruitless investigation. The sister who had been 6 months pregnant when she vanished. "That's impossible," Miriam breathed, even as certainty settled in her bones. "How could you know that name?" Henry's eyes locked with hers, a wisdom far beyond his years shining through the fever. "Because she told me. In the dreams. She said to tell you." He paused, struggling to remember exact words. "She said to tell you that she's sorry she never got to introduce you to your nephew." The half-heart necklace had slipped free from Henry's hospital gown, gleaming against his pale skin in the harsh fluorescent light. Engraved on its surface was a single word that completed the pendant in the metal box. "Together." "Henry," Miriam whispered, her world reshaping itself around an impossible truth. "What was your mother's full name?" "Her maiden name." "Emily Rebecca Whitlow," he replied, his eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion claimed him. "But before that, before Grandma adopted her, her name was Emily Rebecca Delgado." 6 months could change everything. The crisp autumn air of October had given way to winter's grip, then spring's gentle awakening, and now summer stretched before them, golden and full of promise. Miriam's modest apartment in the Westport district of Kansas City had undergone its own transformation. The sparse, functional space of a woman who lived to work now filled with evidence of a shared life. Henry's sneakers by the door, colorful drawings magnetized to the refrigerator, a bookshelf overflowing with middle school textbooks and dog-eared fantasy novels. Miriam stood at the kitchen counter, slicing fresh strawberries for breakfast, while coffee brewed in the ancient percolator. She refused to replace, despite Henry's frequent complaints about its temperamental nature. Through the open window came the sounds of a city waking, distant traffic, birds calling from the maple tree outside, a neighbor's wind chimes dancing in the morning breeze. Ordinary sounds, peaceful sounds, the soundtrack of a life rebuilt from ashes. "Is the coffee ready yet?" Henry appeared in the doorway, hair still tousled from sleep, wearing an oversized Kansas City Royals t-shirt. A new one, royal blue and crisp, not the faded hand-me-down he'd arrived with. "Almost," Miriam smiled, taking in the subtle changes 6 months had wrought in her nephew. He'd grown at least 2 inches, his frame filling out thanks to regular meals and the soccer team he'd joined at his new school. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded, though they still darkened when nightmares occasionally revisited him. Nightmares were inevitable, Dr. Winters had explained during their weekly therapy sessions. Henry had experienced trauma few adults could process, let alone a 12-year-old boy. The fact that he could now sleep through most nights was already a minor miracle. "We should leave by 9 if we want to beat the traffic," Henry said, reaching for a strawberry from the cutting board. His voice had begun to change too, occasional cracks and drops hinting at the young man emerging from the frightened child Miriam had first met in room 318. "Everything's packed in the car already," Miriam assured him, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, regular for herself, mostly milk with just a splash of coffee for Henry, who insisted on the ritual despite not actually enjoying the taste. Today's journey had been planned for weeks, a pilgrimage of sorts to the place where everything had begun and ended. The Whitlow house, now empty and abandoned, had become an unofficial memorial site. Yellow police tape still fluttered from the trees surrounding the property, though the initial forensic work had been completed months ago. The Garden of Stones had yielded its grim secrets under the careful excavation of the crime scene unit. 2 sets of remains, just as Henry had dreamed. Rebecca Delgado and her unborn son, buried 15 years earlier beneath the carefully arranged river rocks, and Emily Whitlow, her body found exactly where Henry's drawings had indicated, beneath the stone that had felt warm to Miriam's touch on that rainy night. Donna Whitlow's trial had dominated local headlines for weeks. The prosecution had built an airtight case using Emily's letters, Miriam's recording, and the forensic evidence from the garden. The revelation that Donna had killed not just her adopted daughter, but also her biological mother, Rebecca Delgado, who had come searching for the baby girl she'd been forced to give up for adoption decades earlier, had shocked even the most hardened court observers. The story had emerged piece by piece through testimony and evidence. Rebecca, 19 and pregnant again, had tracked down her firstborn daughter only to discover she'd been raised by a deeply disturbed woman. When Rebecca threatened to reveal the truth and reclaim both Emily and Henry, Donna had silenced her permanently, burying her in the garden where she believed no one would ever look. 7 years later, when history threatened to repeat itself with Emily planning to escape with Henry, Donna had chosen the same solution, but she hadn't counted on the connection between Henry and his mother, a bond that transcended death itself, manifesting in dreams and pain that eventually led to the truth. "Do you think the flowers will still be there?" Henry asked now, sipping his milky coffee with a slight grimace. "I'm sure they will be," Miriam answered, though she couldn't be certain. The impromptu memorial that had appeared at the edge of the property, bouquets and stuffed animals and handwritten notes from strangers touched by the tragedy, had been maintained by neighbors for a while. But time had a way of eroding even the most heartfelt gestures. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, each lost in private thoughts. The drive to the county line took almost an hour, the familiar landmarks sliding past Miriam's window like scenes from a half-forgotten dream. When they finally turned onto the gravel road leading to the Whitlow property, Henry reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "I'm okay," he said, answering her unspoken concern. "I need to see it one more time before we go." The house looked smaller somehow, diminished by abandonment and the knowledge of what had transpired within its walls. The memorial was indeed still there, though weather-beaten and reduced to a few hardy artificial flowers and laminated notes secured with rocks to prevent them from blowing away. Miriam parked at the edge of the property, respecting the police tape that still marked it as an active crime scene despite the case being effectively closed. Donna Whitlow had been sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, her silence in the courtroom as complete and impenetrable as the emotional void that had allowed her to kill twice without remorse. Henry approached the memorial slowly, a small notebook clutched in his hand, not the tattered red one that had first led Miriam to the truth, but a new leather-bound journal Dr. Winters had suggested he use to process his experiences. Writing, the therapist explained, could be a powerful tool for healing trauma. Henry had taken to it immediately, filling pages with memories both painful and precious. He knelt beside the memorial, adding his own contribution, a carefully folded paper crane bright blue against the faded flowers. "Mom taught me to make these," he explained when Miriam joined him. "Before everything happened, she said they carry wishes to heaven." They stood together in silence, the summer breeze rustling through the overgrown grass where a house had once stood. The Garden of Stones had been dismantled entirely, the earth beneath excavated and then filled in, leaving only a rectangular depression as evidence of what had once been there. "I'm ready," Henry said finally, turning toward the car. for the new house, for everything. The everything encompassed more than just their planned move to a small house in a suburb with better schools. It included the DNA test results that had confirmed what Henry's dreams had already revealed, that Miriam was indeed his great-aunt, that Emily had been her niece, that the family bonds severed by tragedy and time had somehow found their way back together through an impossible connection. As they drove away from the property for the final time, Henry rolled down his window, letting the warm summer air fill the car. "You know what's weird?" he said, watching the landscape flow past. "The pain is gone completely. Not just the stomach pain, but the other kind too, the kind that doesn't have a name." Miriam nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The ache of emptiness that had defined her life since losing her husband, her unborn daughter, and her sister had eased as well, replaced by something she'd thought forever beyond her reach, a family, reconstructed from fragments. Back at the apartment, as they finalized packing for the move scheduled for the following day, Henry paused while labeling a box of books. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," Miriam replied, looking up from the kitchenware she was wrapping in newspaper. "Do you think Mom knew that you and I would find each other somehow?" Miriam considered the question, remembering Emily's final letter. "My love always was, and always will be, pressing from inside me, too big to contain, too powerful to die. I think she hoped," she said finally. "I think love that strong doesn't just disappear. It finds a way to keep going, to connect people who are supposed to be together." Henry nodded, satisfaction settling over his features. He returned to his labeling, but not before adding one more note to the box. Henry's books, the ones that were inside me all along. That evening, in the golden light of approaching sunset, they visited the small memorial garden they'd helped create at the local cemetery. No bodies were buried there. Emily and Rebecca had both been cremated, their ashes scattered at a peaceful lake outside the city, but the twin headstones provided a place for remembrance, for anchoring grief that might otherwise consume them. Henry placed fresh wildflowers before each stone, then stepped back beside Miriam. "I gave a presentation at school yesterday," he said suddenly, "for the end-of-year project." "You didn't tell me," Miriam said, surprised. "What was the topic?" "The things you can't see but that hurt anyway," Henry quoted, his expression solemn beyond his years. "I told them about Mom, about the dreams, about how sometimes what hurts us isn't a disease or an injury, it's just truth trying to be heard." Tears filled Miriam's eyes as she wrapped an arm around his shoulders, feeling the subtle strength that had replaced the fragility of their first meeting. "What did your teacher say?" she asked when she could trust her voice. Henry smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, something that had once seemed impossible. "She said sometimes the bravest thing we can do is listen to the pain instead of trying to make it go away, because it might be telling us something important." As they walked back to the car hand in hand, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, once, twice, then fell silent. The world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the small triumphs and tragedies that defined human existence. But in that moment, for Henry and Miriam, the silence that had once been filled with secrets now echoed with something entirely different. The quiet persistence of truth finally heard, of justice served, and of love that had indeed proved stronger than death itself. Sometimes the deepest truths aren't spoken with words, but felt as pain pressing from within. Henry's story reminds us that children often sense what adults refuse to see, carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders. What would you have done if you were Miriam? Would you have had the courage to listen to that inexplicable pull toward a suffering child, risking your career and safety to uncover a buried truth? The garden of stones that held such terrible secrets now stands as a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, behind ordinary facades and respected community members. But it also teaches us that love transcends even death itself, that a mother's determination to protect her child can echo through dreams, through physical pain, through the very fabric of reality, until justice is finally served. In your own life, are you listening to the truths that press from inside, or are you dismissing them as mere anxiety? If this story touched your heart, remember that there are many Henrys in this world, children whose truth goes unheard, whose pain is dismissed. Be the Miriam who listens, who acts, who risks everything for what's right. Follow our channel for more stories that will challenge your perception of reality. Like and share this video if you believe in the power of truth to find its way into the light, no matter how deeply it's buried.